Right, so hello everyone. Whoop, that didn't come out right. Hello everyone. Darn, coffee's not kicked in yet. So as we've been spending the last week or two mucking about with shape keys, and today is Valentine's. So happy Valentine's to whomever your Valentine is. We're going to make a simple excuse me, we're going to make a simple Valentine's accessory. So we're going to make a heart. Oh, hello Liana and Miyaka. We're going to make a little heart as an accessory item that will morph, will change shape. So that means creating a shape key animation. So first things first, let's make the heart. We're just going to start with the default cube scene blender thingamajig. Don't need to do anything particularly special here. Just make sure we're in the right view. So we're facing forward. It doesn't really matter. So what we're going to do is shape the heart first. And we've done a couple of videos. Well, there are a couple of videos on this. There are a couple of ways of making hearts. You can just use the mesh, which generally speaking is pretty straightforward. But there's also, which Miyaka, who is in chat, Miyaka showed in one of her streams. If she's got the video in her archives, go and look at her channel to see how she's made the heart that she did, and that was using a, well, it's a line or a curve in Blender. I can't remember what they're called in Max. Where are they? Curves. Spline. There we go. Miyaka's just said it's a spline. So pop over to her channel. What's the channel address, Miyaka? Pop that in the chat. And then go and watch how she made her heart using a spline. We can do the same thing but with curves. But this might be easier, but it's just a question of preference. So what we're going to do is use the cube. So we've got our cube object. Right, so it's twitch.tv/Miyaka's Creations. That's MIAKAS, and then Creations. So go and watch that. Right, so edit mode. And all we're going to do is place a couple of loop cuts. So loop cut and slide. So loop cut and slide, this one. And then move the mouse over the edge so the cut occurs perpendicular to the edge that you've selected. So if you select a horizontal edge, the cut will appear vertical. If you select a vertical edge, the cut will appear horizontal. So we want a vertical one first, so we select an edge running along the top. Left click to select it, and then that makes the cutter, the actual thing that cuts the mesh, appear. And you can either move your mouse to slide it around to position it, or you can right click and it will auto center. Then we want another one, but horizontal, so that means moving the mouse over the vertical edge. And then we want to position that, so left click, drag the mouse, and then left click to confirm. So this gives us, a very basic shape that we can modify a little bit. So we're going to switch to wireframe, And then we're going to use a couple of selection tools, border select and circle select. So that's B and C. Deselect. We need to clear the mesh of any selections that are currently active. And then we're just going to, or alternatively, if you want to be really clever, if you hold the control key down and left click drag and draw on screen, you draw a loop selection. And you can do the same thing again to make multiple selections. So control, left click drag, and you have loop select. And so what we're going to do is scale these inwards. So switch to the scale tool. So these are your primary manipulating tools. So we've got, what's that one? That's translate, that's rotate, and that's scale. So translate, that moves you left and right. Rotate is obviously rotating around, and then scale is scaling. But with scale, we can left click drag the colored arrows and just change the position or shape of something. So that's all we need to do for the top there. Scale it inwards a little bit. Clear those selections. And we want to make another selection, so either border select or circle select. So circle select gives you this little circle that allows you to, essentially it's paint select. So if you left click or left click drag, you can paint a selection. So anything that's touched by the brush is added to the selection group. Or, so to get rid of that, you can either press escape or right click. Or, let me clear that, border select, and you get this tool. Left click, drag, drags out a box, and anything inside the box is selected. Actually, we do want that. So with the scale widget still selected, left click drag the handle, or if you, the scale handles have an orientation marker and then a widget handle at the end. Just grab this and then drag it whichever way you want to scale the selection. I'm going to change color, so I'm just double check that this is, yeah, that's a bit easier to see, green. Right, so we've got our selection. So we could again have done, whoops, left click, drag with the control button down, and that would have made the selection as well, but we've got our selection at the bottom. Left click, drag inwards. And we're kind of creating a diamond shape initially. Deselect, and we want to select this group in the middle, and then just, we don't want to scale this, we want to move this, so switch to the Translate widget. So the Translate widget has arrows on the widget terminals, and as with the scale, you just grab the arrow and move. So we want to just move these downwards. We want to do the same up at the top there. So deselect, control left click and drag. So what we've got at the end of this should be a very, 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 very simple low poly It's very low poly. Switch solid. The shape of a low poly heart. So we can add a couple more loop cuts to this to make it a little rounder. So loop cut and slide. So this button again. No worries, Liana, go and make your gravy. We've all got to make the gravy. Loop cut and slide. And we want the loop cut, let me just deselect that. We want the, in this instance, we want the loop cut to go across the mesh. So we need to select one of these edges because it's splitting, the loop cut is splitting the edge that's actually highlighted or selected, if you like, the edge that we want to split in two, so that the loop then goes around the mesh. So clear that, loop cut and slide, left click, and then just right click to set it automatically in the center. But what we want to do now is shape this top section a little bit. So we can change selection mode. So that's these buttons. So we've got vertex, edge, and then we've got face. So this one's vertex, this one's edge, and this one's face. We want edge. So click that, and then we can right click select, shift right click select. So we've got two edges selected. Switch to the scale modifier, scale transform widget, and then just change the shape, and then you can play around with the widgets, toggling between transform and scale to change the shape to give you something that looks more rounded but still keeps it relatively low poly, and also adjust the other edges should you deem that that's going to give you the shape you want. So that's right click, shift right click, and then we can do the same at the bottom. And then maybe put one in the middle. So we are making this a little more rounded. So select our edges. There we go. Right, so next we want to reduce its thickness or its depth. Place a loop cut. Whoops. What did that do? Oh, nothing. We want to place a loop cut down the center, and we want this to be centered, so select a horizontal edge, left click, and then right click to set it automatically dead center of the object. And this is because what we're going to do is switch out of edit mode, go into object mode. We've still got the scale widget selected, so we can use that. Just reduce its size or thickness or depth. Go back into edit mode. So what we can do now is one of two things. We can either we can either select the face and reduce the size of that on both sides, or we can select, whoops, why isn't it doing it? Oh, there we go. Or we can select the edge that we just created previously and scale that upwards. That's the easiest one to do. So left click inside the white area of the scale widget whilst the scale widget's active, and this will scale uniformly in all directions. And then what we can actually do as well as is select those two, so this edge and this edge, this edge and this edge, and we've still got the scale widget selected. Just scale those outwards a little bit. Select the center edges, scale a bit more. Whoops, wrong way. And for even greater control, you can switch to vertex select. Let's see. In fact, actually, let's go back to Edge. We're going to make a loop select. So that's Alt key, right click. That'll select an entire loop of edges or faces or vertices. So what we can do is use that and the scale widget again and play around with the size of some of these loops. So what we're doing is with the scale widgets being active, we're using particular axes. So it's the green is Y, red is X. And we're just shaping the heart, making it a bit more rounded. Whoops. So we've got a bit of mushing going on there, so we fix that. Vertices or vertexes. Whoops. Select vertex. Shift right click. And just play around until you get a shape that looks okay, and that looks okay. So that's let me just drop a cube. So from the default cube, we've added a couple of cuts. I'm just going to use the shortcuts for this, which is Control R, makes it easier. So we've just added a couple of cuts to get our initial shape, which we essentially create a very simplified diamond shape from. So once you get more familiar with Blender or whatever 3D application you're using. So that's the starting shape of the heart. So that's 2 cuts and 2 edge manipulations or vertex manipulations. And you've got the basis of the heart. So the next step, let's save this. Save as. This is an accessory. So next thing to do is to add some smoothing to this, because right now it's in what's called flat shaded or faceted display. So it's got very hard edges. Each face is drawn separately or considered a separate element of the mesh. So we want to get rid of that, and we do that with smoothing. So in object mode, can be done in edit mode, but switch to object mode, select the object, and then click the smooth button, and it changes the appearance of the mesh. It makes it look smooth, organic in other words. So we can see, let me duplicate this actually, so duplicate. I'll make that flat. Right, so that's the difference. So we've got flat on the left, flat shaded or faceted, and smooth shading on the right. And the one on the right is what we want. So next, let's move these out of the way. I'm going to use layers for that instead of deleting them. So that's the M key, M for Marty, or move to layer. Brings us, this pop-up appears, just click one of the little buttons and they are now moved to a layer out of the way, but you keep them instead of just deleting them. So next thing to do is to assign a material. So right click, select, and you can change the size of your panels. Move the mouse over a border between panels until the double-headed arrow appears, and then left click drag and that resizes. We want materials, so that's material properties, and this started from the default cube, so it already has a material assigned to it. If we started with an object that we placed in the scene, there would be no material and you would have to add one. So you would do that just by clicking the add button, and that will populate this panel. So right now, so we're in material properties, but right now there are no materials. There's nothing listed in the material list, so the panel is completely empty. So click the new button and that will populate the panel with some basic material properties. Like so. But if you start from the default scene cube, you won't need to do that. It'll have one already assigned. So we can take advantage of the fact that that's there. So it's got a material. We need to change the material name for compliance with IMVU. So heart space square brackets 0 square brackets. And then we can change the color. So click on the diffuse, this color preview thing. Not quite sure what the name of that actually is, but diffuse color of the material is just basically a color preview. Click that and then we can change the color of the material. Move the mouse away to close that. And that's a very basic material. Next is to add a texture. So once you've got your basic material properties, texture, and this again, because it's the default cube, or it started from the default cube, it will have a material assigned to it. Not a material, a texture assigned to the material. Whereas an object that you've added to the scene won't. So again, the panel will be blank, so click the new button and that will populate with some basic properties. So our heart, we can call this again. So heart, you don't need to follow the naming convention exactly, just so that we know what our material is. Double check type is set to image or movie. And click new. This will give us a little pop-up. Same again, we don't need to follow the exact naming convention, but keep it all relative to whatever it is that you're doing. So we're creating a heart texture, just call the we're creating a heart image, so call your texture heart, your image heart, and the material itself heart, so that you know what you're referring to. And this one can be let's do 512 by 256, which is very big, but it's for illustrative purposes. 256. We want to generate type UV grid. You can use a color grid. And OK. So that creates this temporary texture. Double check coordinates set to UVs. We don't have those assigned yet, that's the next thing, but we need to set that in a material. And that's basically it for that section of the... So you've basically created a material, given it a texture, which we can now UV map to the object. Right, so save this. Save as 2. So next step, switch layout. So we've got some layout options at the top here. It's best, you don't have to use these, but it's convenience. It's a convenience thing. So just click the display list, select UV editing, and it'll switch the view around. So we've got the 3D view on the right, the UV image editor on the left. So what we're going to do is edit, add some UVs. And the way that we do that is select the object, switch to edit mode, select everything. So we may have to do that twice, once to clear any previous selections and then again to reselect everything. So we've got everything selected, and then from the mesh menu, UV unwrap, and then unwrap, and then watch what happens on the left hand side. So that's our UVs, very basic because of what we've done at the moment. So we want to see the texture appearing on the mesh, so switch to texture mode. Let's turn that around so that, because we've still got a light object, this thing in the scene which is illuminating the object. So we've got our object with a basic UV at the moment. We'll adjust this in a second, but in the UV image editor on the left, go down to this section at the bottom. So down here, and we have a image selection list. And the image that we created earlier, heart, is available, so click that and it'll appear on the mesh. It's not ideally positioned, so we need to correct that or fix that. The way we do that is to add a seam. This is the easy way to do it. So we're still in edit mode, clear the selection. We want to make a loop selection, so that's Alt, right click again, and that'll select a loop around the mesh. And then from the mesh menu, edges, mark seam, and this will highlight the selected edges. It'll make them go orange. Edges, mark seam. So if I deselect all of that now, that edge or that loop has now been highlighted orange, indicating that there is a seam in the UV. And a seam, what a seam does is it splits the UVs into sections. So wherever there is a seam, the UV will be split. It's essentially like cutting the mesh up, but we're just talking about the UVs here instead of the mesh. So reselect everything, and then from the mesh menu again, unwrap. Because we shaped the cube, we need to do something. So exit edit mode. We need to essentially reset the mesh because we've shaped it and changed its size. So make sure it's selected, object, apply, transform and scale, rotation and scale, sorry. Edit mode again, and then do that again. So make sure everything is selected. Mesh, UV unwrap, unwrap. There we go, and that readjusts the UV. There's a complicated reason why that has to be done, but basically Blender still looks at the object the way that the object was originally when it was dropped into the scene. So it tries to unwrap the object relative to the heart being a cube and its original shape as a cube, instead of the reshaped heart that's been squashed and smushed. So this is the UV, and this is what's called an expensive UV, in the sense that we have a left, not quite sure which side is which. So we have a left and a right side. So depending on the level of detail you wanted in your texture, the thing that actually is visible in IMVU, you could have, as we have here, two sections for the UV map, or we can decrease the size of the texture and make this 256 by 256 or square, doesn't matter how big it is pixel wise, and then what you can do is overlay the UV maps. So 256, if you do that in Blender, obviously you have to remap the UVs. And then select the UV itself. So we're in island selection at the moment. So that's this one. But we've got vertex, edge, face, and then we've got island, which can include all sorts of shapes and faces, because an island is considered an element that is detached from every other element. And then your selection tools, we don't have a widget in the UV image editor, so you're having to use your shortcut keys or the selections. Where's the transform widget? Could have sworn it was a... so you're using your transform widget shortcut key, so that's G for scale, G for... Hang on, so A selects, C for Charlie, that's your circle select, B for Bart, that's your box select, and then you've got G, which is translate, R for Robert or robot, that rotates, and S for sugar, which scales. And if you're using the, texture with less texture space, just drop the two halves on top of each other. Make sure you select everything and then scale that up to fit within the space you have. That ensures that both sides are using the same texture. So it's either or. If you want something that's more unique, go with using more space. And just make sure that your UVs actually do sit just slightly inside the object, the texture space. And that's UV mapping. So we've now got a texture assigned to this, and we've got UV maps. So if this were a derivable, the next step would be UVs. Oh, hang on, what we could do actually is snap to pixels. This ensures that the vertexes, the individual vertexes of the UV map, are snapped to pixels. That makes it easier for people to paint textures, because you're within Blender, although the position of vertexes is a decimal position in terms of it can be 1.013 whatever. If you snap to pixels, it makes it slightly easier for painting, because you don't have the same sort of tolerances around edges when you're dealing with low resolution images. So that's something to keep an eye on. Whoops, that was hide. Didn't mean to do that. So snap to pixels. And that just makes everything align to the pixels. So that's 512 pixels across by 256 down. So within that range, each of the vertices is going to snap or lock onto the closest pixel. And obviously the larger the texture, the better the resolution and the better the texture distribution. Smaller textures, so if we drop this down to 128 by 256, you've got less texture space, which means that your alignments are going to be less well, they're going to be rougher, actually. They'll be rougher because you're using fewer pixels to define the shape of the object, the object's UV map. But anyway, so once you've got all of that sorted out, UV's snap was on, so we want to export UV Layout Png, and this is it 1? I think it's 1. But what this does is it gives us a texture map. So give it a name, save location, that's fine, export. So if I open this in GIMP, find it, where is it gone? There it is. So that is our UV map. So you can paint over that. So if we type that's a bit tiddly. That's even tiddlier. That'll do. Whoops. Not 100% familiar with GIMP. Let's just save that. And then export. Whoops. Why isn't that exporting? Where's Liana? Should be exporting, not quite sure why it's not. Let's try a different format. Well, TGA worked. Not sure why the PNG didn't. Right, so what we've done there, created our texture maps, just created a rough texture. So switch back to default mode because we've done all the stuff that we needed to do for the UV map. So default. Switch to texture mode, That'll show the texture. And then what we need to do in materials is swap out the image. Well, we need to swap out this temporary or generated image for the one that we just created or exported from GIMP. And we do that by switching the source type from generated to single image. And the mesh will go pink, which means that there is a material and texture and image reference, but there is no actual image. So we then click on the folder icon and we have to search for the texture that we just created, which is there. Let me just get rid of this light that's in the scene, so select and just delete that, we don't need it. There we go. So there is the heart with the texture assigned to it, so A and B. So you might want to do that because you might want to export your UV map, get your UV map all set up how you want it to be. Just export it, get it exported so that you've got an image that you can work with, and then put some recognizable text on it, whether it's numbers or letters or something that you can see the orientation of. So this is the letter A and the letter B. We're kind of assuming that the letter A is not flipped around because it's basically a mirrored object. So we know that the UV maps, at least tentatively, we know that they are the right way around. So if you were to put some gushy text on here, well, on your image, if you were to write something on one side or the other and then apply it to your mesh, it would be backwards. So it's always a good idea just to get your object UV mapped, get a basic UV map exported, do a basic material, a basic texture, get that imported and associated with the object so that you can see which way round it is, and that is correct for us. So what we're going to do next is object mode. So in object properties, why is that not listing a... So in object properties, that's weird. That should be listing heart. So if that happens, if it doesn't list anything, just click on the browse to, which is this button to the right of the input field, and it'll give you a list of available textures. Just click it and select and set the texture and it'll all appear. Not quite sure why it did that. So what we're going to do next is object data. I'm just going to name this heart.mesh. The .mesh is optional. It just helps identify the object. Save this. Save as. Right, so next what we can do is create a little morph animation. So for that, make sure your object is selected. object data properties, and we want the shape keys section, because we're going to add a shape key, or shape key is what they're called in Blender, but a morph. So basis is the shape of the object as it currently stands or sits. And then you want to create a key, add, let's see, let's just keep this simple. So double click that, rename pump. Right, so we've got two shape keys, the default shape and then a key. And the key is the one that's associated with the actual changing of the object shape. And we do that switching to edit mode. Let's see. Okay, so what we're going to do is select this bottom vertex. I'm going to snap the cursor, which is this red and white thing. Going to snap that to that vertex. And then we're going to use that as a pivot for the next phase. So select, right click, selection, can never remember what the menu is. That's the trouble with using shortcuts. Oh, there we go, snap. Cursor to selected. So what we want to do now is select everything. So we need to deselect that one vertex just to clear the selections. This ensures that we select everything. Then we're going to change the pivot point to the 3D cursor. So the widget's moved to that location, indicating that that is now the pivot point. And then all we're going to do is scale. So press the S key and scale the object upwards. Left click. And that gives us our shape key. And that's all a shape key is. It's just a difference in shape, literally, between the basis, which is the shape of the object as it is by default, and a modified shape, which is the second one, or the pump. So that is a shape key. It's as simple as that. And we can test that by left click dragging the value slider, and it'll show us. So what we do next is create a little sequence with that. So timeline, change that to dope sheet, and then we change dope sheet to the shape key editor. And what this does, so it gives us a timeline and the shape key is already visible. And to create an animation, all we do is take the timeline slider, indicator, whatever it is, and at specific frames we change the value that's attributed to this value indicator. At the moment it's 0. Then we change the value at different frames or key frames, hence the word keyframe, and mark a position like so. So this is our first frame. This is set to 0. So let's just double check that we need the frame rate set to 30 frames a second for IMVU. So at frame 30, let's zoom in a little bit. At frame 30, that's 1 second. So let's just set our 1 second increments. So let's just do 3. So that's 30, 60, 90. So we've got 30, 60, 90. So that sets the base frame. So what we can do now is select a frame and adjust the value that's associated with the shape key or the slider. And the orange highlighters disappear because the frames, these two frames at the end, are exactly the same, and that's highlighted by the orange highlighter. If something is placed in between those, it changes the well, it basically breaks that particular sequence between the two frames. Whoops. So that is our shape key animation. Very simple. And of course, you can make your shape key animation very, very complex depending on how many shape keys there are. So you could have several. So we've got just a generic pump one that just, so let me just play this back. This will be slow because we're streaming at the same time. It's very slow because of the streaming. Whoops, that should have been 90, not 80. Oh, hi, Francie. So the pump action takes a second. But depending on your shape keys, so we've just got pump, which is just an increase in size of the object, but you could have as many shape keys as you needed to do whatever it was that you wanted to express with your animation. So you could have a section that shrinks the width of it or squashes the height of it, that changes the shape of different elements, and you make your animation sequence by doing the same sort of thing, just by placing the cursor at your key frames and adjusting the values that are attributed to the shape keys. So if there were more shape keys, they appear in the timeline. And you just adjust the values that are associated with those shapes. So let's save this. This is 4. Right, so just double check. That is very slow because of the streaming. needs more power, Captain. We've given it a name, so that's heart.mesh. Right, so the next thing is to turn it into an accessory item. So we want the avatar skeleton for this, or the avatar accessory file. Which can be found at, let me just drop that in chat. Which can be found at, if you just go to catsbits /IMVU. You can download the starter files. The file that you want is female accessories. Right, so that's the female accessory file. And what we're going to do with this is append or import the mesh that we were just making and just attach it to the chest, one of the chest bones. So append is file, append. You need to browse to the file that you were using, so it's accessories in this instance. And then we want Twitch. Twitch heart number 4. And then click on the object folder. So we've got all these folders because what append is doing is essentially treating the blend file as a zip file or a zip archive. So you want the object folder. So click on that. And it'll reveal all the contents of the file that you were just working on. So we select heart.mesh, and that's why we named it, so that we can tell that it's not Cubo1 or Cubo2. And then just append. Now it will be in the scene, but it'll be tiny. And we can double check this. Object, snap. Oh, and it's not snap, it's, which one is it? It's view. So we want view selected. And it has gone there, and there it is. There's the heart. It's super tiny because of the size difference between Blender's default scaling and IMVU's. So whilst it's still selected, and it will still be selected, what you can do is zoom out and just scale up. So press the S key and just scale up. Or you can type actually. So press the S key, S for Simon, and then type a number 75. And it'll scale to that value, and then press enter to confirm. And then all we want to do to turn this into an accessory is using the widget. We don't necessarily want to do anything to the mesh in terms of shaping it or doing anything like that, because we've already done that in our project file. I have no idea why that comment was modded, Frenzy. One down. I've no idea why it modded that comment at all whatsoever. But anyway, so once we've got the file, the mesh into the accessory file, we don't need to do any editing to it because we've already done that in the project file. So all we want to do really at this point is maybe scale it. We might scale it, rotate and position. So we want to position that up by the chest. Or it could be at the belly. Depends. And we can use the rotate and just rotate it slightly. And double check that it's imported the whatchamacallit. Oh, it has shape keys. So there's the shape keys. So we are currently using the action editor, but the shape keys have been brought in, which is excellent. So if you select the object, anything that's associated with the object will be brought into the file. And there is our shape key. That's quite funny actually. So we need to select a bone that we want this to link to. So I'm switching to wireframe just so that we can see. In fact, actually, maybe easier just to select the layer the bones are on. So these are all the bones, and each one of these is a separate armature. And these are all set up the way that they need to be set up for IMVU. So don't adjust these in any way, shape or form. Don't do anything to them. You can add bones to them. For example, if you were wanting to make a tail, you might use the pelvis bone, pelvis node as your anchor point, because these are all anchor points. So if you were to making a tail, you could add bones to this set of bones and create your chain of bones that you would need for a tail. So a bone there, another bone, another bone. And they would all be connected with the... You can do that, but don't modify the originals. Don't modify these. It'll mess up the orientation of your accessory item. So we want, let's go back, whoops. So what is that one? That is spine 02, spine 03, spine 04. So where's the heart? So the best one really is going to be spine 03. Okay, for that, right, so this is where it gets a little... Right, so let's move the heart to another layer that the avatar mesh is not on. So select, press the M for Marty key, and we can use one of the layers that aren't being used at the moment. So we've got, the way that the avatar file is set up, you've got the main avatar armatures in one layer, and then the hands on their own separate layer, because the hands themselves have more, almost as many bones in them as a component as the entire armature. So let's just move the heart to a layer that's not being used, M for Marty. And that means we can select the layer that the armature is on, and then we can hold the Shift key down and click the layer the heart is on, and we can see the two together. So before we, well, to link these two up, make sure the heart is selected, Object Data, and this time we want Vertex Groups. So I'm going to create a vertex group called, add that, double click, rename, we want this to be attachment root, enter, go into edit mode, whoops, select everything and then assign, and then double check using your select and deselect buttons. So what happened there when we went into edit mode, because the shape key was selected, it drew the mesh, or it resized it relative to the shape key. So you can select, it doesn't really matter in this particular instance because we're just adding a vertex group. But just to double check, select basis and the mesh should revert back to its default position. So what we can do now is right click the mesh, shift right click the armature we want this associated with, and we can either parent it, where's parent gone? Oh, there it is, parent, object, object keep transform. Whoops, have we done it the right way around? Yeah. Object, parent, object, object keep transform, or we can select the mesh and in modifiers that's this button, modifiers, we can add a modifier. And we want the armature modifier for this. Once the panel appears in the object, because the armature, because the accessory file has a heck of a lot of armatures in, easiest thing to do in this instance is click the little eyedropper. That's this little thing. Click that and then click on the armature you want to use as your object or parent object, and it'll appear in the object text input field. And we can test this by going into pose mode and moving the bones, and the mesh should move with it. There are 2 bones per accessory, and we've parented it. We've parented the mesh to the root bone, which is the main origin bone of an armature. Not an armature. It's the main origin bone of an accessory. So what we can do now, save the file. Save as. Twitch. Five. And then we can export this. You don't need to set the mesh, it'll keep the position, it should keep the position, so select the mesh object, the armature, export FBX, selected objects, disable these two, so that's apply modifiers and the other one. Armature, always make sure of all the options, particularly if you have if you have morphs assigned to the mesh, make sure always that apply modifiers is disabled. But for skeletons, generally, always disable add leaf bones. And then in animation, NLA strips disable, and force start and end keying disable. Alright, so blah 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 blah. Okay, and then export. Oh, that was quick. So IMVU, create. Have to wait for IMVU to do its thing. New derivable. This is an accessory. Go. Just check my notes. I have some. Could have sworn I wrote this down somewhere. Right, so import. Fbx import, import Fbx. We want to go to our accessories folder. And we want the accessory file. Twitch Heart 5. Right, so it's giving us the option to set a skeleton, but it's not showing us any options. So check the hide two skeletons that contain no meshes. Those should contain meshes. Well, let's try this and see what it does first. I think I know why it's doing that. So we want attachment root, 2 bones, no meshes. No meshes, right, okay. So let's just import changes, see what it does. Right, blah blah, nothing there. Right, so back in Blender, right click the mesh, shift right click the armature, object, parent, object, and then object keep transform. And then export again. So there's a difference. There is a difference between if you're using Cal 3D as your export medium. So if you are exporting directly to Cal 3D using the Cal 3D script, using the modifier, using the Armature modifier tends to work better. But for Fbx, depending on the type of object, it seems to work better when you parent directly. So you are directly parenting the mesh to the armature, because the modifier is an indirect way of doing that. So select the 2 objects once you've got all that set up and export again. Just overwrite selected objects. That's okay. That's okay. And that's okay. Need to save this. Save. So Blender, cancel that. Do that again. Alright, it's still doing it. That's weird. Okay, troubleshooting time. Attachment route. Yeah, that's all right. Just double check. Assign, deselect. Control P, parent, object cube transform. Let's do that again. Yeah, so there should be a mesh associated with the armature, but it's not. It's not. So let's get rid of the modifier, and we can check that the mesh is still parented to the armature, because if we move the armature, the mesh will move with it. Attachment node and attachment route. Attachment route, that's okay, so let's try that. Let's save this, save as 5B. Save as. Right, so make sure those two are selected. The armature should be selected last. Export Fbx. 5B. Selected. Blah 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 blah. Export. So import. And it's still not doing it. So what you may have to do then so sometimes this happens. So what we need to do when this happens is make sure that the only objects that are selected are the ones we need. Then we're going to invert the selection, so that's Control I for indigo. And then we're going to delete everything from the scene. And all we should have left is the object and the armature. We're going to save the file. Yeah, so we're going to save the file. So we've only got 2 items in the scene now. So we've got our armature and then the mesh, which is linked to it. And that's all we need. So what I'm going to do now is we don't have to select anything in this instance. We're going to force Blender, Fbx, we're going to force Blender to export everything that's in the scene. So we're going to deselect or deactivate selected objects. We're going to keep all the same properties that we had before. So apply modifiers is disabled, add leaf bones disabled, and NLA strips and end and start, or start and end, that's disabled. So the only difference is selected objects is disabled. And what this does is it forces Blender to export the entire contents of the scene. And as we've only got 2 objects in there, it should export the 2 objects together. So this is number 6. Export. So let's close that just to double check. No, create a new one. Go. Right, so the accessory is there, which is the glasses. And we want 6. So there we go. That's what we wanted. But what we actually want is to unhide one of the other options it's given us, because we actually just need the attachment root, which is 2 band 0 meshes. Why is it doing that? Okay, well, let's try it with 4 bones, 1 mesh. Let's try that and see what it does. So it's not brought in the morph, but let's check that it's actually brought in the mesh. Is it 2 or 0? I think it's 0. No, is it 0 for girls and 2 for boys? Let's just check type. So import. And let's see what that does. Hey. Config, so we need to change this to spine 03. And why is it backwards? Yeah, that's not where it's supposed to be, but so it doesn't always work first time. Spine 03. Let's try spine 02, see what that does. Okay, so that's weird. It's in the right place, but it's not rotated correctly, which is a bit weird. That's odd. But it automatically assembles everything for us. Right, so what we need to do to let's just get the see if we can get the morph key, morph shape. So what we need to do for this, we've got a morph shape animation, But we need to make an action for this that corresponds so dope sheet, action editor. So frame 1, move the mouse over the 3D view, press the I key or object animation, insert keyframe. And we just want location rotation. And what we're doing is setting the location of the object, because the shape key sequence needs a corresponding action associated with it, otherwise it doesn't export. So it doesn't need to be a complicated action sequence, just 2 frames, and that should be it. So let's save this, save as. In fact, what's the rotation? Yeah, it should be okay. So scale, save, export. Let's see if this has exported our shape keys. So disable selected objects. That's okay. Heart.mesh. Right, so it's brought in our shape key animation now, which is this one at the bottom. And you have to do that because I don't know if 3D Studio Max is the same way, but you have to do that for Blender because of the way that the export script works. You can create your sequence, but it won't actually export with your project unless there is an action associated with the mesh. But you can create a very simple action and it'll import 0.01, so it was 0. Import changes and apply. So that's applied, and we should now be able to create an action. So stance.idle, room, pick same ensemble, and then down at the bottom we have our heart mesh, and we should be able to get this to loop. So, and there we go. So obviously that works. So obviously if you were doing this project now, you would have to go back into the Blender file and make adjustments to the mesh so that it was pointing the right way. And that should be pointing the right way, but it's not for some reason. Let's just save that anyway, save as. Right, so let's go back into Blender, see if we can solve this problem. So what's the object's rotation? What about the armature. So that is weird. Because that implies that dagnabbit. So let's change the role value. Could have sworn these were all fixed up. Let's try that. So 6b, save as. And then export. Same settings again. Accessory. Fbx import. Right, so it's brought in these, it's brought in that, okay. So all we're doing at the moment is just testing the rotation of the object. Oh, dagnabbit. Which one did we use? Oh, get rid of that. See, that's another one of the issues with IMVU, is that the accessory, the mesh ID for an accessory differs if it's a female accessory or if it's a male accessory. So the accessory IDs are 0 and 2. I can never remember which way around they are. Let's just do 2. Import. Okay. Apply changes. Config. So this is spine SB 03. Yeah, that didn't change anything. That's a bit weird. So let's so if it's rotated, whoops, if it's rotated that way, so that means could do with this is where, from a creator's point of view, this, what we see when we, from a mesher's point of view, I should say, not just the creators, but from a mesher's point of view, what we see when we bring in our meshes is essentially useless, because now that we've got an issue, we can't determine, without spending a lot of time going back and forth between our project file and making adjustments here and making adjustments. So what we need, or what we could do is we've imported a specific item which is an accessory, and it has a skeleton, but we can't see it. We can't see the skeleton, and we can't see which way it's pointing or it's orientated. So we could do something in Blender to compensate for that, but it may not necessarily be the right solution to the problem that we're trying to solve, because this essentially means that so we deleted all of the, because now of course we need to go back to the an earlier iteration. Hang on, let me just so what I can do here is so all the bones are pointing the way they should for to match up to the skeleton. So is this an issue with adding an accessory to the torso bones, or is there another issue going on here? But because we can't determine, because we can't see the orientation of the skeleton in IMVU, which is what we need to be able to do, because that is essentially backwards and flipped on its side, which means the correction for it would be to so using local, so that would mean that this should be, let's just mirror it. It should be pointing backwards, not forwards. But if it's pointing backwards, it's not then matching the orientation of the bone relative to 3D Studio Max. So now we've got an issue. Most of the other bones seem to be working okay, so if you were doing something for the legs or whatever it was that you were actually animating, or another alternative I suppose is just to which we've done before, is just to unparent everything, make sure that's unparented, right. We want the cursor at the center of the scene. Yeah, thanks for stopping by, Frenzy, and catch you later. And then what we can do is drop the mesh to that point, selection to cursor, delete the armature, so we've only got a mesh in the scene. Save as. So fix its orientation even though it doesn't need to be. Doesn't need to be, so let's just export this and see what it does. Export everything in the contents, right, so that's okay. Whoops, 7. Why has that gone up there? Oh, I see. Right, okay. Yeah, so because there's an animation associated with the heart, the position of the heart is within the action is up top there. So what you have to do is reinsert or overwrite the keys. And that'll keep it in position, but the morph will still play. Alright, so save over that and export again. So this is troubleshooting. This is what troubleshooting is, just backwards and forwards. But it would be helpful, it would be a lot easier to do if we could see what's going on with the skeleton. And we can't, so it just means you're backwards and forwards testing. Seven. So we've got the morph, which is fine. Mesh, fine. Right, so what this does, so it's, for some peculiar reason, the heart is rotating. But doing it that way, so you just make your object and always have it positioned at the center of the grid in Blender, because that means as long as you have for your accessory, as long as the it has a vertex group that's called attachment root, it will attach itself to whichever bone you actually want it to relative to that position centered on the grid. So at the moment it's attached to the head, I think it is. So if we change this to spine 03, yeah, there's some weird stuff going on because that shouldn't be happening at all. But the mesh is positioned at the... So what happens if we do right wrist? Then we can add the action. Set it to loop infinitely, 0, and then apply, and away it goes. As far as I'm aware, they can't, IMVU can't remotely, unless they are doing. I don't think so. But that's very weird. Because that is, what's the orientation of that in the scene? So the orientation of that is, so it's relative to the front view, so we are face on. But in IMVU, for whatever reason, it's twisting it, which is very weird. Not entirely sure why it's doing that. Because the accessory file is set up so that the bones are all pointing in the same direction as the avatar skeleton. Yeah, more weird stuff. Yeah, quite right, Liana. So again, this is another one of those instances where some more fiddling will have to be done off screen. But at least the morphs come in, so that's something, I guess. So is it 5B or 6? No, 6 is the one that's got all the stuff removed, so 5B. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Because what the advantage, well, the apparent advantage of Fbx, or the advantage of Fbx, one of the advantages of Fbx, is unlike Cal 3D. So once you've made your mesh, unlike Cal 3D, if you use Fbx, you don't have to fiddle around with all this scaling and rotation stuff where you have to object and then apply, where you apply rotation and scale to reset the mesh. You don't need to do that with Fbx. It's supposed to. It's supposed to read the physical position and orientation of the object in 3D space and use that data as the default. So it doesn't set the object, I guess, relative to the global orientation of the scene. So, because otherwise, if you don't do that with Cal 3D and you export the heart where it currently is, what will happen is that when IMVU imports it, the heart will be, when you attach it to the appropriate bone, in this instance that's spine 03, the heart will be the same distance from female 03 to the heart as the heart would then be from spine up here somewhere. So it would be up here because it's using, it's using the distance from where it currently is to spine 03. That's why you have to reset the mesh when you use Cal 3D, but you don't with Fbx. But the problem that we're encountering now means, or it kind of implies, that the orientation of the bones is all wrong, but that's not, it shouldn't be doing that. So let's try one of the thigh bones. See, so the heart should be at the front and rotated 90 degrees clockwise, but it's not. So let's try so that's the hand. Is it shin? Oops, that bone doesn't exist. What's the bone called? Oh, LF calf. Yeah, so that's doing the same thing. It's rotating it around the axis. So ironically, it's behaving as though the bones, or some of them, are pointing in there. So that means that that one, which is that bone, would be pointing backwards and rotated 90 degrees on the y-axis, which is completely bonkers. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there. Because the stuff for the hands work and the arms work fine. That's how the gift boxes were done. Didn't have any issues with those. So something is going on. Not entirely sure what's going on there. Well, on that note, I guess we're going to call it a night, because it's 2 hours and we've hit another problem that we've got to do a bit of problem solving with. And hopefully that'll be the next stream, either tomorrow or, what day is it today? Thursday, so Friday, well, it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, so over the weekend. So there should be another stream over the weekend where we've got to the bottom of this problem and figured out what's going on. But the basic principle is that we've got our morphed heart in. So when you're doing your morphs, just make sure that you have your morph sequence and there is an action sequence associated with the morph itself. Otherwise it won't. Whoops, wrong one. Dope sheet. Action sequence. So there needs to be an action sequence in here, but there isn't one at the moment. So in this version of the file, so we created one in order to get it to export. So now I've got to put thinking cap on and take a look at the mesh, take a look at the project, see what's going on there. Right, so on that note, thanks for watching everyone, and we'll call it quits there. Subscribe, follow, click the buttons, do all the bits and pieces as per usual, and we shall see you on the next stream with possibly, hopefully, maybe this fixed. If not, you'll find out why. Tune in next week. Right, so bye for now, everyone. Thanks for dropping by. Hello, everyone. So this was supposed to be for tomorrow, but strike while the iron is hot, as they say. So from, what is it? Just double check microphone. Yep, that's okay. So from earlier, we were trying to work out why this heart was not working. So what we were doing was creating. So if the archive is not, the archive should be available. So if you watch the stream from earlier, we were making a heart. We created a heart in Blender, gave it a little animation. So it beats, essentially. And then we exported that to IMVU as an Fbx file. But for some peculiar... Oh, that's the wrong one. Surprise. But for some peculiar reason... right, so for some peculiar reason... brilliant. The morph animation comes in, so we get our beating heart. So it's doing its thing, but as you can see, it's not where it's supposed to be, because in Blender it's supposed to be, whoops, it's supposed to be in front of the avatar, but for some reason it wasn't working. It was importing the mesh wonky, and unfortunately, because we can't see the avatar skeleton, not the avatars, well yes, because we can't see the avatar skeleton, nor can we see the accessory skeleton, we can't determine what the problem is, because it could be a problem with the avatar, it could be a problem with the accessory skeleton, but without being able to visually check the orientation of the skeleton, or it could just be that the mesh is the wrong way around, or something like that. But ideally what we want, oh hang on, can't do it because I haven't got the hang on a second whilst I just move that over there, move that over there, start that, start that. Right, so hang on a second. Right, so ideally what we want is, what colour is that? Right, what we want is the skeleton, or a way to determine the orientation of the skeleton bones. So this is attached to the spine bone, which is about here. But because we can't see the skeleton and we can't see the orientation of all the bits and pieces, when we attach the accessory, the bones are aligned. Let's use a different color. The bones are aligned, or the bone, the armature is aligned so that it's essentially lying on its back, but we can't tell which way it's the axes are pointing and whether they match up to what we should be seeing for the avatar. So we don't know, without seeing skeleton, whether it's a problem with the skeleton, the avatar skeleton, or the skeleton, the accessory skeleton. But it also could be just a question of the mesh. Something was wrong with the mesh, and that all that was needed to be done was to compensate for it appearing on the back. So if it were an issue with the mesh, for example, because let's say for the sake of argument, where's Brenda gone? For the sake of argument, you had done a number of manipulations and changed the shape, the orientation and the rotation of this, and did not set the object, and you were using Cal 3D as opposed to FBX. What can sometimes happen is that the position of the mesh gets all messed up. So even though it appears where it should be in Blender, when you export it and import it into IMVU, it can appear in the wrong position. So without being able to see the skeleton structure, I don't have something that we could, hang on, do I? No, where is it? It's not that one. I can't remember where it is now. But the FBX tools allow you to load in a skeleton. FBX review, there it is. Right, so when this kind of thing happens, what you can do is check the skeleton, or check the FBX file in either FBX Autodesk's FBX review, or the other one is the FBX converter tools. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. So that's that loaded in. No, that hasn't loaded in. Do that again. Oh, it's not doing it now. Why is it not doing it? There should be an FBX heart in there somewhere. For some reason it's not working. Open. Let's try the proper way. See if this works. Ah, there we go. Right, so you can load in an Fbx file. And what this normally allows you to do is, this is just the mesh on its own. So there are no skeletal elements. But what you can do is load in an Fbx file, and the Fbx review program is it not doing it? It's not doing it now for some reason. Okay, so do it this way then. 6. Oh, there we go. Right, so what you can do is load in the Fbx, and granted the scale difference, the size difference of IMVU projects is absolutely huge. So these axis, well, it's not axis indicator. This is the origin point indicator for the bone that's associated with the accessory item. But the colors denote the axis orientation, and they match what we're expecting to see. So I'm not quite sure I can keep that. Can't keep that on screen and zoom out. So relative to the way that the heart is appearing, it matches the orientation, local orientation of the individual bones of the, whoops. So that's the armature that it's associated with, but the orientation of the skeleton in Blender matches the orientation. So if you look at the colors and the so the x-axis goes left, right, green, front, back, blue, top, bottom, and that's what we've got. So we know from that that the Fbx export is working properly in terms of its position. But in Blender, not Blender, in IMVU, it's still appearing like this. So it seems that when you export from Blender, you have to double check. This is for accessories that have any form of animated object. The mesh is animated. I have to double check that the accessory skeleton or the accessory armature that you are using has an action associated with it. So in pose mode, you create an action, that the mesh has an action associated with it, and these don't necessarily need to correspond in length to the morph animation, which is the shape keys, which is the heart beating. But just for the sake of convenience, just mark a start frame, mark an end frame, and you're done. But on export, deselect everything, so there should be nothing actively selected, although that is optional. It doesn't really matter, because what you can then do export Fbx, and then make sure that selected objects is deselected, and then go through the rest of the options. So deselect apply modifiers, that's necessary to be disabled for morph targets, morph animations, or shape keys as they call them in Blender. Add leaf bones, disable that, and then your animations, NLA strips and start end frame keying, disable those. Then export, and what that's doing is exporting the entire contents of the scene, so it's exporting everything. So we're forcing Blender to export everything that's in the scene. And accessories are the only type of product that you generally might find that you have to do this in order to fix certain types of problem. Because if we then new derivable, accessory, go import, Fbx import Fbx. This is number 8, heart 8. And it'll give us the select skeletal root panel. And it'll now show us a lot of options. And what we want is root node spine 03. In this instance, that's spine 03 because the heart is attached to spine 03, which is this armature, which corresponds roughly to where the chest is, or the upper abdomen, is it? Or, well, stomach area. And you want root node, which is the that's the element that's actually in the Fbx. So you want root node, 2 bones, 1 mesh. (0.01). That's your scaling for using if you're using the accessory starter file. For female accessories, it's 2. The ID, mesh ID is 2, not 0. And it's brought in the shape keys, or morph, import changes, apply. And that indicates that the mesh is at least facing the right direction, because if it does that, then, or something along those lines, so if we do head for this, so by default, if there's an issue importing, the object will appear at the back of the mesh or somewhere else. It'll appear, most of the time, it'll often appear off center somewhere. And that's when you know that there's an issue with the mesh. But if the object appears facing the front or facing as you possibly expect it to, then you're almost halfway there. So all we need to do now is spine 03, that's the bone that's associated with, apply, and it plops down into place, which is fantastic. Whoops, we don't want that one, we want that one. Actions, so we create an action, stance.idle, so this plays automatically when it's loaded. Room, ensemble, same ensemble, so down in the bottom section, in this section down here, oh, purple, still got the same color, down in this section, that's where we set the morph and that will now be available for us. So we select that, set the loops to 0 so it loops infinitely, and then apply, and there we got our beating heart, and that is our beating heart accessory for Valentine's. And that's what should have happened earlier, but didn't. So the thing to do then is double check all your elements have the appropriate action associated with it, so Blender knows exactly where everything is supposed to be, and you export the entire contents of the scene, because you can then select the ones that you want. So if we just go through that again, import, so it lists all the parts of the avatar by default, but we don't want that. We want specific elements. So has it actually listed the heart? No, it doesn't list the heart for that. This is why it's important to export the entire scene, to force Blender to export everything that's in this file, in this project. And the attachment that's actually being used only has 2 bones. So that's how you can check whether you're using the right armature or skeleton in this instance. 3 bones is 1 too many. Well, it's Goldilocks. 3 bones, 1 too many. 1 bone is 1 too few, and 2 bones is just right. So select, and it'll show you the mesh that's associated with that armature, and then you can just import, and it'll bring it all in. So that was the problem from earlier. To import, apply, change the bone it's associated with, so spine 03, or it could be, what's the other one? What's that one? Spine 04. Spine 04. It looks like an inflatable lifesaver or something. Actions stance dot idle morph 0. Whoops, what do we do? There we go. Oh, it's the trigger, case sensitive. And there we have getting bashed on the chin. And that's what should have happened earlier, but didn't. So double check all your animations, make sure everything's got a sequence or track associated with it, and then just export the entire contents of the scene.